Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's absolutely wonderful to connect with so many alumni from around the world in this year's Alumni Day of Action. It's actually our month of action on social justice. We've had a really energizing and impressive series of talks thus far on food poverty, women in politics, inclusion in the workplace, and much more. And we've had an excellent meeting of Convocation today as well. And I just have to say, it's so exciting to have returned to an almost normal life back on campus. A few weeks ago, seeing the flood of students arrive during induction week, it just felt so good. And also that everyone is taking precautions seriously, but making the most of this ability to interact in person again. So I'm just very proud of all of our students, staff, and all of you alumni for taking part and supporting our activities. I'm really proud of the commitment that the university makes to social justice in so many ways. And today, we're absolutely delighted to have the Reverend Professor Keith Magee deliver the Convocation lecture in this final theme of the Alumni Day of Action, Race, Religion, and Migration. Professor Magee is Chair and Professor of Practice in Social Justice here in the School of History, Classics, and Archaeology. He's also Senior Fellow in Culture and Justice at University College London. Reverend Professor Keith Magee trained as an economist and theologian. He's a public intellectual with a focus on social justice, with an eclectic educational history culminating in a doctorate of theology from the Harvard School of Divinity. He's a deep thinker, an inspirational writer, and a change maker. His many accomplishments include founding the National Public Housing Museum in Chicago, which is committed to being a living cultural experience on social justice and human rights. He also co-created the Multicultural Initiative at Yale University Center for Dyslexia and Creativity. He serves on many boards, including the State of Black Britain Symposium, and he has won many awards, including from the MacArthur, Ford, and Seedlings Foundations. He's the author of the book Prophetic Justice on Race, Religion, and Politics, which was released in January 2021. And he's working on a new book, which we might be able to talk about later. We're absolutely thrilled that he has joined Newcastle University, and we have already benefited hugely from his insight and experience. And I look forward enormously to his talk today, which might cover everything from Aristotle to modern day movements and the post-pandemic world. So over to you, Reverend Professor Keith Magee, on Mind Moves Matter Beyond Hashtags into Change.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for the opportunity to share with you all today. I am delighted to be the convocation speaker for this Alumni Day of Action. My passion and my commitment to Newcastle University exceeds its longstanding legacy of inspiring academic excellence, innovation, and creativity to benefit the world. Our not so hidden jewel, I believe, as a university is made visible by our alumni, along with our students, academics, professional staff, and with our research, teaching, and learning, and how it impacts the world. Certainly want to thank Professor Chris Day for his ensuring that we are actually going from Newcastle for the world. And I'm especially grateful to Professor Julie Saunders, our provost and deputy vice chancellor, for her unswerving commitment towards justice through academia and ensuring it happens from the university within our broader community. And she is indeed a guiding light, and I believe our very own themist. The most common thing that brings us together today beyond Newcastle University is the fact that 18 months ago, we were impacted by a global pandemic, severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus, that manifested in 2019, and we call it COVID-19. It literally arrested us. Though there has been disparity around the world in the distribution of vaccinations, the one thing that we all realized with COVID-19, that whether you were rich, working class, or poor, whether you were white, Black, Southeast Asian, whether you were Buddhist, atheist or Jedi, whether you were from Newcastle upon Tyne in the north of England or Newcastle in the mid-Atlantic state of Delaware in the United States, it impacted and affected us all. And just 2 months into our lockdown reality, from New Zealand to Poland, from Argentina to France, something else happened that arrested us: the murder of George Floyd. And I'm of the opinion that what is key to the global response of his murder was how COVID-19 impacted us. We were all in lockdown, trying to learn the latest and to discern when things would get back to normal, when literally the normalcy of what has been happening to Black men in particular in the United States dropped into our laps, from our television screens to our computer screens to our smart devices. Certainly, many around the world had become familiarized with the hashtag Black Lives Matter, or simply #BLM, but the movement became alive on the 25th of May, 2020. The world watched what happened outside of a grocery store in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a Black man who was slowly, casually murdered by a white police officer. And that moment has awakened the world. Even those who were posed as woke slumbered out of sleepwalking to realize that there was a need to have a hard, frank, and brave look at this hashtag. The Black Lives Matters movement remains a social movement to address police brutality and racially motivated crimes against Black people. And although a jury convicted Derek Chauvin, one man cannot carry the burden of what has happened in America and around the world. The fact that he was found guilty does not exonerate all the past, present, and future acts of brutality. And it does not eradicate centuries of systematic racism, nor does it bring Floyd or any other victims back to their grieving families. All too often, reflections of racism and division pervade society. And the fact that many officers and people in power continue to treat other people with hatred and fear should come as no surprise. However, many bad apples that are actually incarcerated, however many body cameras are imposed by law enforcement, no matter how much we introduce into reform, none of this is sufficient without the engagement of people. We have to stem the flow of injustice, starting with the heart. And I believe that we can only begin when they start to see the other as ourselves. I believe that the problem of the 21st and perhaps the 22nd century is going to be the problem of othering. Othering is a set of dynamics and processes and structures that engender marginality, and it frames itself around this persistence of inequality across any of the full range of human differences based upon groups' identities. Dimensions of otherness include but are not limited to religion, sex, race, ethnicity, social, economic status, class, disability, sexual orientation, and skin tone. And although the axis of difference that undergird these expressions of othering vary considerably and are deeply contextual, they contain a similar set of underlying dynamics. In a world beset by seemingly intractable and overwhelming challenges, virtually every global, national, and economic region has conflict wrapped within it, and it's all based upon difference. Othering undergirds this territorial dispute, the sectarian violence, military conflicts, the spread of disease, hunger, and food insecurity, and even climate change. Perhaps a more simple way to offer the meaning of othering is tribalism. It's this social concept that postulates that human beings have evolved to live in tribal societies as opposed to in mass societies, and thus will naturally form social networks constituting new tribes. Othering. In a remarkably candid, wide-range public interview while President of the United States, Barack Obama cited tribalism as a source of much of the conflict in the world. Many of the stresses of globalization and the collusion of cultures are brought on by now through the internet and social media, have led to a default position. And even on social media, and in this massive world that we live in, people have become tribes, us, them, hostile towards the unfamiliar and even the unknown, and pushing back against those who are different. Whether you are born with strategies and methodologies to further explain othering and tribalism, whether you know it deeply, I prefer to get to the heart of the matter. And that is what moves us beyond what we already know. That division and strife and hate and bigotry and so many other terms that exist to separate us. I believe we have to look in moments like these and use moments like where we are today in the world to build bridges rather than building rivers. I believe we have to come together, and there must be togetherness. And the only way to get there is to infuse the world, in my opinion, with social justice. As one in this space of social justice, I believe that it is combined deeply with the distribution of justice. Social justice is about being fair, impartial, and just with the distribution of opportunities and privileges within a society. There are 5 main principles of social justice that are paramount to us all: access to resources and equity, participation, diversity, and human rights, access to resources that provide equal access to give everyone an equal start in life. Many societies offer a multitude of resources and services for their citizens, such as healthcare and food and shelter and education and perhaps even recreational opportunities. But there often exists unequal access to the services that are being provided. Equity is about individuals having tools to create their own, being able to come into social economic status in order to move towards similar processes and outcomes that everyone else have. Equity is about advancing policies that provide support to overcome systemic barriers. And then participation gives everyone in society a voice, an opportunity to verbalize their opinions and concerns and to have a role in any decision-making that affects their livelihoods and the standards of living. Understanding diversity and appreciating the value of cultural difference is especially important, because all need to understand that in able to have better, things must be constructed and realized amongst different societal groups. Where there's discrimination, there's a lack of the consciousness of what diversity looks like. And then human rights. Human rights is one of the most important principles in social justice and forms a foundation part of the concept. Human rights and social justice are intertwined, and it is impossible for one to exist without the other. Human rights are fundamental to societies that respect civil, economic, political, cultural, and legal rights of individuals, and governments and organizations and individuals must be held responsible if they fail to ensure upholding the rights of others. And if I may have the privilege of using the Reverend in my title, in the Christian sacred text, the Apostle Paul writes a letter to Rome, which consists both of Jews and Gentiles, to persuade them to build upon peace and close relationships. He says it this way: I ask that you not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Or one translation says, don't become so well adjusted to your culture to fit in that you don't think of others' cultures. I believe that the most viable solution to the problem of othering is not our DEI movements, bringing our chief diversity officers into spaces. But I believe it's about belongingness. The most important good we distribute to each other in society is the fact of belonging. The right to belong is prior to other distributive decisions, because we are saying you belong here. And when you belong here, it gives you the right to be a part of the decision-making. Belongingness entails an unwavering commitment to not simply tolerate and respect difference, but to ensure that all people are welcomed and feel that they belong in a society. It is the ideal of creating a circle of human concern. And I believe that universities are one of the most equipped places to introduce, infuse, and manifest and transform change. I often say that universities are not poised to train activists, but to activate minds. Etched into our student union building is Magee Loman, mind moves matters. Greek philosopher Aristotle postulates that the body and the mind exist as a facet of the same being, with the mind being simply one of the body's function. Aristotle suggests that the intellectual existence of these two parts are important, something similar to matter, this passive intellect, and something similar to form, an active intellect. Aristotle says that intellect is inseparable, impassible, unmixed, since it is the essence of natural activity. When intellect is set free from present conditions, it appears as just. And what is that? It alone is immoral and internal. And without it, nothing thinks. Just. He identifies the heart as the seat of intelligence and emotion and sensation. He says that it's hot and dry. Aristotle describes it as three chambered organs that are important and vital in the body, organs that surround the heart to make it function, the brain and the lungs, and they are simply there to cool the heart down, to bring the heart into reason. Social justice, movements that matter, start in our minds and in our hearts, and there change begins. I envision a world that doesn't need hashtags. I envision a world where there's no need for hashtag Black Lives Matters, hash stop hate, hash women rights, hash stop killing Asians, hash me too. I believe in a world that can exist if we, each one by one, take on the small responsibility of asking ourselves, what is just in the coffee shop? What is just in the classroom? What is just when I'm driving on the motorway? And when we realize that something is unjust, that we do something about it. Mrs. Coretta Scott King, the mighty widow of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and you win it in every generation. It's not about looking in the rearview mirror. It's not even about looking in the distant future. I believe it's about realizing what we can do today and tomorrow to form a just society, believing and creating a framework for a place where we simply know and realize that we all matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Keith, for a wonderful, wonderful talk and really an inspirational call to action. I would like to say that Keith has very kindly agreed to answer questions. If anybody would like to put questions in the Q&A chat box, that would be lovely, and we'll move over to that in a little while. I would like to start off carrying on what I think should be a conversation, because I think you've really opened us up for all of us a way forward, but which is really based on dialogue. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But I just wanted to pick up on one of the things that you started with, which is the notion that the pandemic and the lockdowns really made a difference. You said it woke up even people who were woke and brought them out of their slumber, that somehow the murder of George Floyd was made more real to all of us because we were in lockdown. I just wonder if you could elaborate on that thought and why that is, why that made such a difference.
I believe that just that, because we were at home around the world, trying to figure out how to cope and get back to this sense of normalcy here in front of our faces, undeniably was something that happened, where people, for the first time, even in my life, saw someone being killed on television. Someone died before our very eyes. And this humanity emerged. If we look from Russia to New Zealand, people had taken to the streets in Mexico protesting because they saw some injustice that had happened. And I believe that if we weren't home in these isolated spaces, that it would have been another day in America. It would have been what happened and no one would have paused. And, certainly COVID-19 brought us back to some real senses of reality. And here it emerges. And people said, what is happening? And how do we do something about it? I mean, in the philanthropic community, it was overwhelming with people calling. I had calls, where do we give and how do we support? And all these things were going on because people said, this level of injustice is actually happening. What can we do about it? And it's some of the people that I know are very conscious and very committed to justice and equality, but they had seen something on their screens that they had never seen before. And there was a humanitarian cry to say something has to be done about this, if for no other reason that I don't want it on my television screen. If I don't want my mother seeing or my children seeing, how do we stop this and how do we accept it as a reality and do something about it? And so, that is one of the compliments, if there is such a thing, to COVID-19, was that it brought us to a level of consciousness, and the outcry that I've seen from what has happened after the horrific murder and death, I think has built an amazing bridge for us all. It has allowed us to come into what I appreciate and talk about often, a brave space, to say, what's going on and what can we do about it? And people not being afraid to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the shared experience, the collective experience of the pandemic itself somehow brought people together in a way that made them more open to recognizing the suffering of people they might have otherwise considered other.
Absolutely. I believe without a shadow of a doubt that the pandemic was where we all became familiar. Well, no matter our resources and our race, our ethnicity, there was something that we all were sharing. The unknown. I noticed how people were so much more thoughtful and helpful in the process, much more than they had been with the lack of petrol. They were much more engaged and committed. You know, when you were standing in those long lines where, you know, people had to stand to get into the supermarkets or to the shops, there was just a level of compassion that people had where you would see, you know, something that I, you know, wrestle with when the young don't stand for the elderly, you know, and when the elderly would show up past the hours that they were allowed in, where everyone would immediately usher them to the front of the line. Or if a mother showed with more children than the other, there was this consideration. And so this compassion that showed up from COVID-19, I've smiled at.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a question that's come in from one of the audience who writes, the quantity of injustice in the world can feel overwhelming. How do you advise dealing with that sense of helplessness when you do so much, but so much still needs to be done?
Well, remain encouraged in the midst of everything that's going on around us. I think our greatest challenge as a society is that we do not understand the value of delayed gratification. I talk about this often. On my metal device in my kitchen called the microwave, it has a button that says popcorn, even jacket potato. So all I have to do is put it in there, and within a matter of minutes, it's prepared. The process of getting there is long. It's laborious. And I want to encourage those who are doing the work who feel that how can we get this done more quickly? I want to encourage you to have that passion because it's important. But I also want you to accept that part of this will never happen in our lifetimes. And that what we must do is ensure that we're setting markers for it to happen. Life is not a microwave. We can't just put ourselves in, and I mean, if it was, but we can't just put ourselves in there and think that in a matter of minutes or hours or days, these things are going to change. And when we see more bad things happening, we say, well, did I do enough? Yes. The idea of, one helping the next and one enlightening the next. I've gotten from Professor Richard Clay from here at Newcastle, where he said his mother said, you always need to tell something to the person in front of you and the person behind you. If you impact those two, you've done your job. And we see this urgency of things happening around us, whether it's climate change or, food insecurity. And we want to do something to change it immediately because it does need to be immediately changed, but it just doesn't happen that way. And so we have to be steady and committed and gradual and believe that our work will all become a part of a total sum that will get us there eventually.
That's, I think that gives a lot of hope, where maybe not everyone can feel the same level of hope. I think we should all feel a level of hope, especially from what you've said, but just thinking about the one person that you've helped or the one small change you've made and the fact that it will all accumulate up to a greater good, I think is a very good way to live. Just on that note about good things coming from actions, I wonder if you feel that hashtags, despite their limitations and despite their ability to sow division, have actually done some good. What good has come out of hashtags?
The good that has come out of hashtags is the awareness, because they're really about awareness campaigns. So it has made all of us pause to understand things more deeply. The space of social media, I think, has, to your point, both the good and the bad. But the hashtags have really brought full circle all of these issues of injustice, mostly as we're talking in this space, brought them about where you could even take to your computer to say, let me put this hashtag in to figure out what's happening so that I can be informed. So the information drivers that they've created are absolutely important and have been essential.
Mm-hmm. I happen to know from some things you've mentioned to me before that you're also a fan of dialogue with people who might use different hashtags to you, for example. And I wondered if you could tell us a little more about that.
Well, I believe, I was some years ago, I started this ideal of deconstructing safe spaces and building brave spaces, because I think one of the missing elements in democratic debate is how to engage with this unknown element of going back to othering and tribalism. How do we get there? And a large problem has been our lack of communicating with people who don't think like us, who don't believe like us. And I think it's essential to understand that. So I build a community of people around me that mostly do not think like me. Because I want to be more informed when I think of the work that I'm trying to do in the space of social justice. If I'm only talking to myself and those who think like me, I don't believe that I have the capacity to really, truly be impactful. And I don't go into those spaces with judgment. I go into those spaces to learn. I want to understand why. I want to do the research, quantitative or qualitative, to understand how did you get here and what can I do to bring about the change in the world that I really want to see and to experience. Perhaps I should say that I want future generations to experience. I certainly would like to experience it as well. But I think that there are some things that are so fundamentally and deeply rooted in societies that we don't completely understand. When you talk about the issues of hate and racism and Islamophobia, it's not a new phenomenon. How has it survived? What gives it life? Where's its oxygen coming from? And if we don't get in and to have those conversations, we'll never understand that. And so that's what I'm committed to doing. Of course, I'm a full-grown adult, but my mother still reminds me that I'm her alien child and that I should get business cards that says professional agitator with compassion, because I'm always agitating, but I'm always trying to find the place of compassion as we do that.
And you listen.
And I listen. Listening is very important.
We have another question come in. Thank you so much, Keith. I'd love to ask more about who inspires you. Who are the figures from history and today who you think embody the spirit of the world that you dream to see?
So my grandfather is probably the person who most inspired me. He had 3 philosophies that he instilled in all of his children and grandchildren. And the first was that we had to make a deposit in order for someone else to get a return. And that always troubled me. I'm going to put this coin in my piggy bank for someone else. But the idea was that we had a responsibility to the world. And that has always been a guiding principle for me. What am I doing, not for myself, but for someone else? So he certainly was the most informative and inspiring person for me. Beyond that, I could go down a list that would keep us here for 24 hours because there are so many people whose work and their legacy has been important to me. Certainly the work of Martin Luther King Jr., Rabbi Abram Joshua Heschel, who walked with King across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but was doing this work around social justice and equality in synagogues long before he and King fully intersected. The work of William Wilberforce was very important to me when I think of, equality and when we talk about social justice and we talk about the abolition of slavery and what, how their faith of the abolitionists, how it was a driver, really important to me. I mean, again, I could go down the list of amazing of people who have charted the course for me to sit in the spaces and to really do a lot of the framework that I have right now. And so modern day, many of the youth that and young adults that I'm working with, from Newcastle to Warwick to Harvard to, University of Madrid, around the world, that I see as global citizens and framing themselves that way, they inspire me when I think of the work that they're committed to doing now. And then my colleagues here at the university and other universities who are doing work that's about impactful change, whether that's in health science or whether that's in law. There are a number of great people that, I don't think I have, I certainly could probably create a list of 50 if I just wrote them all down, but those are the ones that come to mind immediately.
Wonderful. You mentioned places in the States, Harvard, Chicago, Madrid, over here in Europe, London, and here you are in Newcastle. And it's wonderful to have you here, by the way. And I know you are talking about eliminating differences and having us all feel we're part of a universal tribe. But I wonder if you do have any thoughts or observations or messages for us on things that we might learn about the differences between the US and the UK, because you have a pretty unique perspective, having worked really on both sides in universities and intellectual organizations on both sides. Is there something we can learn from the States, or something that you could send over to the States that you've learned here from the way we do things? Very open-ended question.
Yeah, that one. So I would say to you, specifically around the issues of race, racism exists everywhere and it's real everywhere. The difference of how it happens in the United States and here in the United Kingdom, to me, it's really stark because of the history, I say, of what happened on American soil. So over 400 years of individuals from the transatlantic slave trade actually being on this major land mass called the United States of America, as opposed to really the major numbers of Black people being on British soil on this mainland less than 100 years. And so when there's these efforts to fight and mobilize here around racism and take a model from America, I don't know if that works, because there's not the rich, deep-seated realities on this soil. And so to me, that's one of the major things. And we talk about in the academic space, the number of Black teaching faculty, and that the numbers are so low. I often say, well, does it model the population? And if it models the population, then you have to think about population growth, as opposed to, you can't have more people to do more than you have in the population. And so what does that look like and how do you do that? And so I often want people to have their measures and their considerations based upon some real data, as opposed to this emotional space that a lot of people move in. So there's certainly all these things there. Number two, I like the idea of shared democracy. And I think that there are opportunities to learn one from another in that space. I certainly think that Northern Ireland, what it did with its citizens' assembly around, right? So I think that America has a lot to learn there. So there are lots of things that we can share across the Atlantic, in those spaces, thought leadership, politics around race and inequality. I mean, I could just start babbling at this point because I think about the idea of, you know, of the way that food distribution or the access to it and the cost factors here are so much more tangible than in America. So there's some things that we can learn about how do we really take care of people and what are the value systems of that, how the success or, you know, arguably maybe it's not so successful of a national healthcare system has been effective here as opposed to the United States, you know, pharmaceutical companies, all of these things. There are lots of spaces that we can learn that can bring a more just and fair society between the two.
Thank you so much. Your insights, your wisdom, and your call to us to listen, to engage in dialogue, to not succumb to helplessness feelings, but to keep acting in every way we can to create a universal belongingness are very inspirational. And I really look forward to everything you're going to do here in Newcastle to continue to activate the students' minds and all of your colleagues' minds as well. And I just thank you very, very much for a really inspirational convocation lecture. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I would just like to say that I'm sure that Professor Keith Magee will be happy to take questions or messages by email if you wish to write in, and thank you all for being here today. I just wanted to add one more thing, which is a message about the next event coming up, which is at 3:30, panel discussion led by Sophie McDermott on Make the Change. What are we doing to address the challenges of social justice? And that's on at 3:30 today. Thank you very much again, Keith. Thank you.